Apostrophe CMS onboarding series. Navigation. Creating an intuitive and functional navigation system is a critical element in site development, and Apostrophe CMS provides robust and flexible tools to achieve just this. In this tutorial, we will go through two methods for adding whole site navigation. The techniques we will be outlining can also be used for the creation of contextual navigation for the children of a page, for example. We will also take a shallow dive into generating breadcrumb navigation. While we will be mainly focused on producing navigation for our project, we will also revisit changing our page layout using fragments, including multiple fragments in a single file, and utilizing the global configuration. Lastly, while covering the addition of breadcrumb navigation to our pages, we will also look at the helper configuration function. You can follow along by either editing the code of your own project or by switching to the sec2-6-navigation branch of the GitHub repo linked in the comments below. Pages in Apostrophe CMS operate within a hierarchical structure, a feature that provides organization and structure to your site. By default, when you add a new page, it is placed as a child to the home page, forming a first-tier relationship in the hierarchy. If you create a new page while on an existing page, the new page becomes a child of the current page instead of the home page. This dynamic arrangement signifies the page's position within the tree structure. Furthermore, the placement of pages isn't fixed, as Apostrophe CMS enables rearrangement via a simple drag and drop mechanism. Crucially, information about this hierarchical tree structure is incorporated into the data object, which is readily accessible to any template. This aspect can prove highly beneficial, especially when dealing with parent or ancestor pages in your site navigation. We will go into the data.home and data.page objects as we work through this tutorial. By default, one level of children is available on each ancestor as well as on the home page. This default behavior can be altered by adding builders to the @ApostropheCMS page module at project level. For example, this code would increase the number of levels of child documents returned from any ancestor to 2. We are also passing in an array of allowed areas. In this case, we are allowing 2 areas named main and thumbnail to be included in the data object. Further, we are preventing any relationship field data. In this way, we are limiting the size and complexity of the data object to just what is needed. So the question is, how can we utilize this data to build our navigation? It can actually be as simple as using the output and block tags in the Nunchucks template to extract and present the page information from the data object. Let's start making our navigation by creating a new fragment. Create a views, fragments, navigation.html file and add the following code. I'm going to copy it from the written tutorial and paste it here before explaining it. In this code, we are accessing information about the children of the homepage using data.home._children. Using a for-in loop, we are parsing out each child document and creating a link using the computed URL_URL and the page title. We are wrapping this in an if statement to make sure that we're only displaying pages that have public, not private visibility. Next, we need to add our new fragment to our views/layout HTML file. Let's take a look at that file again. At the beginning of the file, we indicate that we are extending the data.outerLayout template. This template exposes a number of blocks that we can either replace or extend using _super. Next, we are importing our existing top bar and footer fragments. Just below these existing imports, add the following import to the code. Next, we need to render our navigation. Alter the before main block to the following. With this one new line, we are adding the markup from the page tree navigation fragment to our site just below the top bar. To match the appearance of the final project, we will also need to add in additional CSS. The partial SCSS file _theme-navigation.scss can be copied from the modules asset UI source SCSS folder of the sec2-6-navigation branch into a folder of the same name in your project. Additionally, you'll need to import the styling by adding the following to your module asset UI source index.scss file. The appearance of your navigation will depend on how many pages you have added to your site. Right now, if you were to switch the localization of your site, unless you have already localized all of your review pages, your navigation would disappear. If you haven't localized them yet, while in edit mode on the homepage, open the context menu, the three vertical dots, and select Localize. You will then get a modal asking what content you want to localize. If you select this document and related documents, it will localize all the review pages to the selected locales as draft. You will then have to publish all the pages in the new locale. Since we are building our navigation from the page titles, you will need to translate the titles to match the new locale before publishing to have them added to the navigation in the correct language. Note that I'm using the database dump from the GitHub repository, so my content is already localized and partially translated. If you aren't using the database dump, this process will look slightly different. Another approach to generating your navigation that can be more flexible but also requires more work for the content editors is by providing schema fields for adding menu items. Since the navigation is appearing on all pages, we will create the additional fields in the Modules @ApostropheCMS global module. If you prefer, you could instead create a standalone piece type module to hold your navigation items. This would be created using the CLI by running apos add piece navigation, adding the new module to the app.js file, and then adding the code that we're going to be adding to the global module. Open the modules @ApostropheCMS global index.js file and add the following to the fields add object. I'm going to copy and paste the code from the written tutorial. Additionally, add our new schema field to its own tab in the editor by adding the following code to the group object. To add our navigation, we're using an array type schema field. This field has its own field schema and allows the content editor to add one or more entries that contain all of those fields. It is stored in the database as an array of objects, one for each entry. The fields property should look fairly familiar and only has the add property to define all the schema fields for each array item. One new property here is the title field. This property takes the name of a schema field in the array that should be used to name the individual arrays that are listed in the tabs to the left. If this property is not supplied, each array the content editor adds will be numbered. Here, we're using the value of the label array schema field. The help property takes a string that will be presented to the user in the UI. Within each array, we are first asking for the label that will be presented to the user and then the type of link. In the project, we will only be linking to index.html piece type pages, but it's nice to present content editors with the ability to link to outside sites. Moving down in the code, we are using an if conditional to display either a relationship or URL schema field, depending on the value of the type schema field. Notice that for the _page relationship field, we are using a with type property value of @ApostropheCMS/page. This will allow a relationship with any page. At the moment, you can't specify a specific page type. This is the first time that we're using a URL schema field type. It will validate that a link has a valid protocol, like HTTPS, but it won't check that a link is functional before the editor can save the array. It does sanitize the input to remove common XSS attack vectors. Finally, we'll use one additional new schema field, the checkboxes field. This allows for a list of choices where the user can select more than one. By default, all of the choices will be displayed to the user like a radio schema field. However, the optional style combo property will convert it to a drop-down style menu. Right now, if we were to spin the site up and add multiple navigation array pieces, it would look like this. Each array item would be added to a tab with a label taken from the top label schema field. The tabs themselves could be rearranged through drag and drop. However, we have additional options for the styling of array schema fields. Adding the inline true and draggable true properties convert the UI presentation of the array to one more reminiscent of the page tree. Rather than displaying each array item in tabs on the left, they are displayed in a list with each of the schema fields visible. Much like the tabs and the page tree, individual arrays can be dragged to rearrange. Finally, if we add the style table property in addition to the inline true property, Then each array appears as a row in a table. Again, each of the individual arrays is draggable. This method of display isn't recommended if your arrays have conditional fields, as it will change the column labels if some arrays have a field while others do not. In this case, the type field conditionally impacts what schema field is added in the third column. Unless the content editor selects the same type for all of the links, there will be cases where the label for the column won't match the type of input. Now that we have our schema field completed, we have to create the markup to display our navigation and add it to the page. Once again, we're going to add our markup to the views, fragments, navigation.html file. Open this file and add the following to the end. I'm going to copy it from the written tutorial and paste it. To create our navigation, we are once again using a for in loop to step through each of the array items added to the data.global.primaryNav schema field. The data.global object is available in all templates. For each array, we are using an if-elif conditional to test if it is a page or a custom URL. For pages, we are also making sure that the review piece still exists and hasn't been archived. Remember that relationship field returns an array of objects, so we need to gather information from the first item in the array underscore page 0. Lastly, we create our navigation loop using the path we just set, the string the content editor wants to use as a label, and an if conditional to add target equals underscore blank. Finally, in order to display our new navigation, we need to add it to the views/layout.html file. Open that file and modify the before main block. Here we have commented out the page tree navigation fragment, but you can of course simply delete it. Now if we spin up our site, our former page tree navigation will be replaced by any links that you add through the global configuration schema. Breadcrumb Navigation shows visitors the series of pages from the page they are on back to the home page or other major landing page. To add breadcrumbs to our pages, we will use a similar technique as we use for automatically constructing our navigation from the page tree. In that case, we were using the data.home._children. In this case, we will use a different object, data.page._ancestors. This provides an array of page objects, starting with the home page, continuing through the page tree, and ending with the parent of the current page. The only caveat is if a visitor is on the show page for a piece. In that case, the data.page object points at the index page for the piece, not the show page that the user is currently viewing. In this case, even though the individual review pieces don't have a page in the page tree, we can place them as children of the index page with a link. We can test if we are on a show page by checking if data.piece exists and change our markup output accordingly. This breadcrumb trail isn't part of the design of our final project, but might be useful for debugging, or at least demonstrating how you can change your template using an environment variable. If you want to see the output of the markup, you can add this code into the views/layout.html page in either the before main or after main blocks. Ignoring the first line of code for now, we are wrapping our markup in an if conditional and testing for three things. First, we are performing null checking on the data.page object, even though it should be there. Next, we are checking whether that same object has a computed _ancestors property. The only pages that shouldn't are the home page or another top-level landing page. Finally, we are checking the value of the debug mode variable that we will revisit. If all of these are true, we output the markup. Next, we set up a for in loop over the _ancestors object, outputting a link for each with their URL and title, plus an arrow separator. Finally, we use an if-else conditional to determine if we are in a piece. If so, we output a link to the index page for that piece, plus the title of the piece as the final breadcrumb. Otherwise, we just output the page title. Returning to the debug mode variable. If we only want to display this markup if the user enters an environment variable at startup, we need to have a way to check on that variable. We can't do that directly in a Nunchucks template, but we can in our module JavaScript. In order to pass our environment variable to the template, we're going to use a helper configuration method in our asset module. This method essentially adds a helper function to the Nunchucks templates. In this case, we are adding a simple function, async debug mode, that doesn't take any arguments. You can see by the function declaration that you could leverage the await keyword to pause execution until a promise is resolved, ensuring sequential execution where necessary. In this case, we are simply checking the debug environment variable and passing a boolean to the template based on that value. In the first line of code in the template, set debug mode equal apos.modules asset debug mode, we are calling the method. Since the template is located within the top level views folder, we need to use apos modules asset to identify the module supplying the method. Let's reiterate. In this instance, we're not passing any arguments from the template to the method. However, in your custom helpers, you might want to pass a value such as data.piece.productPrice. This could be useful, for instance, when calculating a sales price or regional taxes. Finally, we check that the return value is true, indicating that the project was started with the debug environment variable set to true. To see your breadcrumbs, start the site using debug equals true npm run dev. In addition to primary navigation elements like breadcrumbs and menus, a website's footer serves as a secondary navigation area that's crucial for enhancing the user experience. One common feature is a section for quick links, which provides easy access to important pages on your site or to external resources. Currently, our quick links section is populated with hard-coded links. To convert this to user-selected links, we are going to reuse code that we already added to the modules at ApostropheCMS global index.js file. Open that file and add the following into the add object below the primary nav array field. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that in. This code almost completely duplicates the primary nav field. In a real production site, we would likely factor the fields for each array out into a separate file to be imported and added, rather than duplicating the code. Add the quick links to the footer tab of the groups. Next, open up the views fragments footer.html file. To display our new quick links, we need to change the nunchucks markup for the first column in the div with a class of row. Replace the entire first column with class of col large 4 and pi 3 with the following. As you can see here, I had a little argument with my linter while trying to get my code indented correctly. But as is shown here, the crucial section of code is in the first column. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but we are replacing the first set of links in the quick link section with the user selection. It uses a for in loop to output each item as a list item. As with the primary nav in the views fragments navigation.html file that we added previously in this tutorial, we have some code to correctly set the link if it is a page or custom URL. Note that for the sake of time, we're not changing the second column of links. We're just leaving them hard-coded. While the primary function of a website's footer is to assist with internal navigation, it can also serve as a bridge to external platforms, specifically social media channels. Including social media links in your footer is a strategic way to extend your user's journey beyond your website and encourage engagement on various social platforms. We will finish out this tutorial by quickly adding social media links using the Font Awesome icon set we installed when creating the rating widget module. We will be adding our fields to select the social media links into the footer, so it makes sense to once again modify the global module. Open the modules at ApostropheCMS global index.js file and add the following code to the add object of the fields property. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in. First up, we're asking for the name of the social media network. This isn't really needed for the end markup. We're just using this field so that we can give a name in the list of array items. Next, we are capturing the link address. Finally, we are providing an icon through a select field. The values for each choice are the Font Awesome classes for that social network. Make sure to add your new array field to the footer tab. Next, we need to add markup for viewing our social links to the footer. Open the views fragments footer.html file and replace the code for the third column with the following that I'm going to paste in. We are only altering the portion of code in the div below the getSocialH2 tag. Once again, we are using a for-in loop to step through our array elements. This time, we're just outputting a link with the URL entered by the user surrounding an I tag with the icon class names. That's it for adding our social links. Spinning up our project, we can see that they've been added at the end of our third footer column. We can also see our modified quick links we added previously in this tutorial and 2 review pieces that we added in the pieces tutorial in the series. In this tutorial, we looked at 2 different methods for constructing page navigation. The first used the data object that Apostrophe makes accessible to any template. For the second, we revisited how to use the ApostropheCMS global module configuration schema to make data available to any page. For both of these methods, we took advantage of fragments and the views/layout.html file to add the navigation to our page. Unlike when we added the top bar and footer fragments, we added multiple fragments to the same file. Although we only touched on it briefly, we also looked at how to add breadcrumbs to pages. While we only used the data object to accomplish this, we could have also used the global configuration. We also added this markup directly into the layout, but we could have easily added it as a fragment in the views fragments navigation.html file. We also touched on how the helper configuration method can manipulate and pass data for use in your templates. Finally, we looked at how to make links in our footer more dynamic by allowing the user to add new quick links and social media links through the global site configuration editor. In the next tutorial, we are going to look at some ways that the admin UI can be altered, including a look at reorganizing the admin bar and how to configure the personal settings menu. If you have any questions about this tutorial or want more help starting your Apostrophe CMS project, please join our vibrant community in Discord. You can join right now by following the link in the comments. We hope that you will continue along with our tutorial series and subscribe to the other great videos in our channel.